Thank you for your time today. My name's Daryl Price. Today we'll be talking about automation as it relates to quotes, design, and drawings. So let's take a look at what today's agenda and the things we're going to be covering. First, we'll look at who D3 is, look at who is an automation target, the type of industries that it might be a fit for. We'll be looking at why would you consider it today, and if you did, what do you do? How do you get there? What are the tools that are best used in that path, and when do you use the right one? And you'll notice most of these are going to be based around things that Autodesk has, like the iLogic C360. .NET, of course, is just a basic general total approach to programming, and then we'll dive into other tools and some of the hurdles. And at the end we'll wrap up with some questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So who were we? How did we start? Most of you that are familiar with D3 in some shape or form, you understand that we focus on the manufacturing industry. We are also an Autodesk partner. You'll also notice down further there below the green bar that we also do things with SolidWorks. So we do take more of a CAD neutral approach when we get to some of our consulting type of things. So it's not just about the Autodesk world, but to that regard, a lot of what we do have is Autodesk products. As far as who are we today, we're still a manufacturing focused partner, but the solutions that we focus on, the things that we're doing for our clients, is obviously changed over the years. It's not just clicks and picks of CAD technology. We're really dealing with how does data flow through your company. So data management solutions. I have the ETO kind of bolded out there, and that stands for Engineer to Order. And that is a very heavy focus of D3, and some of the tools that we'll focus on are around Engineered to Order solutions, which is automation. To that regard, ETO is a world that we've lived in for quite some time. The tools that you might understand or know as Inventor ETO, we have developed and created a big portion of that tool set. If you look at the web technology, the user interface, those are things that D3 Technologies has developed. But on top of that, there are a lot of other tools that we've developed that when you buy Inventor ETO, you don't get everything that we've got. Those are things that come with the projects that we work on. But to that regard, there's a lot of experience and expertise that we've been able to develop over the years that we bring to the table when we start to look at how do you go down this path, and where do you start, and how do you get to the end. If you're looking at who is an automation target, you start to see a variety of markets and industries kind of come to the surface. And they're really, you could kind of say, all over the place. But the reality is there's some very consistent things within each of these that go across the boundaries. They're same but different. There's a custom solution each time you do it, but it's still the same general concept. And so we're looking at that technology, and we're looking at those types of tools. So if you are in an industry and your product is reproducible in some way, shape, or form along the same lines as the last project, but it's just a little bit different, then possibly you could start to automate the design and obviously output. So we'll talk about that today. And for the design aspect, that's where we're going to start. So when you're looking at automation for design, it kind of goes to that rules base. If you can apply a thought process of if then that to it, then you're really looking at something that we could start to manipulate with rules and get you down the road a little quicker. Same but different. And then of course what you're really trying to do, the net result here is how do you bring that technology, the rules and the logic of what engineering does on a day-to-day basis, how do you bring that further up into the sales process so that your sales channel can move more quickly through its process without having to strap the engineering department with all of this repeatable, mundane, very tedious work just to generate quotes and to generate some semblance of what you're going to produce for the customer so that they can approve it and sign off for you to begin. Those are the things we're trying to reduce and streamline. On the back end, you might be looking at your outputs. What do you have in the way of drawings? You know, some of the customers that we do drawings for can have sheet sets of 40 to 100 sheets in those. Well, that's a lot of drawings. That's a lot of time to sit down and create all those views. And so we start to look at an easy button that you've got it modeled up, you've got it accurate. Why not hit the button and let the tools create all those drawings for you? You may be trying to push data into other systems, whether it's an analysis tool, like for the tank industry, they have Compress. You may have some kind of a MathCAD, or if you're in the HVAC, you may be looking at something that's dealing with the humidity levels and analyzing that in the airflow. So we can interface with those tools, or maybe it's an ERP system and you're trying to push BOM data over to create item masters so someone's not having to do fat finger entry. Those are the types of things that you can start to integrate and push data downstream now that you have accuracy up at the front. But the key is, how do you reduce backlog? How do you reduce the effects of that bottleneck? And those are the things we're looking at, whether it's at the design side or it's the output side. It's all about reducing bottlenecks and streamlining workflows. So if you're looking at that from a high level, the areas that we're touching are sales. Again, bringing those engineering rules to the front in some kind of a very easy to use user interface so that the person doesn't have to be a CAD operator to configure it. Once you get to the design, for it to be able to integrate and streamline and pull in costing information, material and process cost. And then on the back end, as I said, it's those outputs and those workflows behind the scenes. Another way to look at that when you're taking complex to simple is, again, that user interface, someone sitting at the computer, it's the crunch factor in the middle, and then it's the outputs. And you can see there's a variety of outputs, anywhere from pushing emails out, content to a website, to DXF flat patterns that's going out to the shop floor to the machine. So all of those things are things we look at when we look at streamlining and operationalizing a workflow with the click of a button. The reality is, at the end of the day, you've got a process. It goes from A to Z. Your A to Z is going to be different. But when we come in and we do this review and this assessment and we start to look under the hood, the thing that we're looking for is, where can we take multiple steps in your process and reduce those down to a single or at least a fewer set of steps. And when you start to do that, you're starting to take that minutia out of the process, and that's where you're able to streamline things down, and you're able to get weeks reduced down to hours, hours reduced down to minutes. And those are very real accomplishable gains to be had. We've got customers that are going for 24 hours down to 15 minutes, going from 2 people doing 1.5 projects a day to 1 person doing 4. So those are kind of the examples of incremental steps that you can expect when you start to automate. So what does that really look like? Well, let's take a look at a video and I'll talk over that, but this will give you a chance to kind of see what a real-world automation solution looks like. So as we go through this is usually a web interface. Could still be within the 4 walls of your company or out on Amazon, but the point is, the operator very quickly is able to start to configure the product. He's got a hopper on there. Well, you've got to have something underneath it so it's not sitting on the ground. So we can incorporate rules to guide the user through the process, but again, he doesn't have to know how to mate items or connect items together. The rules in the system control all of that. Let you watch this. We've stuck a manway out here. Well, where is it supposed to be? Well, we can tell it where it needs to be based on the specifications or the requirements of the project. And as we get in here, that could be something that you need to dial in and change a setting. So if it's an HVAC, you're setting the humidity levels of the environment or something. But the fact is, you can dial into these things and set them and do whatever kind of user interface inputs that you need to get the right thing put together so it's configured correctly for the job. Now to the back end. So that's the design side. Now we're going to look at the outputs. First thing we're going to do is get down to the model. The other one was just a visual representation. The data was there, but now we're down to the nuts, bolts, and washers. Now we're also creating the drawings off of that very accurate model. And we're down to the drawing standards that you require, your line weights, your annotations, the way you tell your drawing story. Quotes. Oftentimes quotes are done on the main screen as you click and pick, but sometimes you don't want to show that until the output. Your BOM reports, integrating to ERP, HTML file that would be pushed up. All of these things are real, and then DXF flat patterns. All things that are achievable when you start looking at automating workflows and processes. And all things that can be done at the click of a button. At the end of the day, the thing you have to keep in mind is we are solving very expensive problems. These should be things that are taking lots of your time and really reducing your effectivity and increasing the cost of your sale. So we're trying to take steps to minimize those negative impacts. So why would you choose to do automation today? Well, you probably are looking at things where you're losing projects because you can't bid quick enough. That's a very common thing. We have people coming to us. The other thing is they're trying to expand market presence. They're not the leader, so they're trying to take steps to become the leader or to compete for that market share. And so again, they're wanting to put something together in terms of being able to quote faster, have a more sophisticated solution to put their product together, and let their sales team do what their sales team can do really well, and that's sell the product, place solutions in their clients' hands, and not be tied up in lead times and bottlenecks. This is a big one. Your intellectual property clocks out at 5 o'clock and it doesn't come back. You've got retirement, you have people having accidents, people just move on. Where is your intellectual property? Well, if it's between John's ears and he's clocking out at 5, there's no guarantee he's coming back tomorrow. What we do is help you operationalize that logic that's in the minds of your employees so that you've got a repeatable tool, and it reduces the impact of where your risks are. The other thing is that your competition is doing things and you're trying to keep up. That can be a tough position if you wait too long. If you go back to those markets and those industries that I had up early in the screen that we're flying through, those industries certainly are industries that are on the move, and if you're in any of those, then you need to know that if you're not doing something, your competition is, and you need to be thinking about how to streamline your own workflows. So now let's start to take a look at the technology. iLogic is something that comes if you're an Autodesk product user and you have Inventor, then you have iLogic. Why would you use it? Well, if you're using this in the place for an engineer who has CAD on his workstation, he's trying to configure a solution real quickly, it's a great project. It's a great tool. It'll do that very well. But what it won't do is it won't do something if you're trying to do this for the company-wide. You need salespeople to have access to this data. You're trying to push it to the web or a mobile deployment. That's where you start to run into roadblocks with iLogic. Configurator 360, another Autodesk tool. Where does it make sense to use? Why is it different? Well, Configurator 360 can run an ETO model. Remember, ETO is really referencing the Inventor ETO tool set. And so you can develop an ETO model. Inventor or Configurator 360 can actually operate the intelligence of that model. But where it's limited and where the full ETO package really expands that solution is when you're trying to integrate with some kind of a DLL call out so you can get data from something else. You're trying to interface with an external database. You're trying to integrate with an ERP solution on the fly, pulling over costing information, or in in a web service call, you're trying to reach out to an external source and pull information in. Your user interface. I mentioned earlier we developed this UI. Well, Configurator 360 has a very limited version of that. The full ETO version allows you to really customize that user interface to the needs and requirements of your user, and that user may be different in different stages or different levels of access, and so to have that flexibility requires a more robust solution. And of course there's just much more, but the key at the end of the day is where do you use these tools and what makes sense where and when. So I've got this image here. This is something that I show oftentimes to kind of help people visualize where does the footprint of these solutions exist. And so if you start, if you recall back a while ago, I said, you know, for the CAD designer, the engineer, the person who's maybe got CAD on their station and they have iLogic and they're trying to configure something real quickly, you're really at the productivity stage, really at the root cause, and you're in engineering at their desktop. You're not really going up the stack as you see where sales might have a desktop or web application or mobile application. You start to lose the ability with iLogic, but you see there with Configurator 360 it can start to jump in that direction. But if you're trying to do, but it doesn't go to the right very far where you're starting to integrate. .NET, C#, those types of applications do all kinds of programming. They do that very well. But you'll also notice that both Configurator 360 and .NET struggle at the model level. There's limits, either because of file size or control. So there's limits there, and we use all of these solutions. They all have fits, but you need to know where you're going at the end so you know which technology you start with, or what does that roadmap look like. But with ETO, if you look at that, it really does everything. It's too heavy and robust if it's just an engineer. While it does all of that, it would be kind of overkill. But when you start trying to take this outside of just engineering to the company, and you start needing to do all of these things, both mobile and web and integration and outputs, that's where ETO does some things that there's no other solution on the market that does. So why would you do ETO over iLogic? Well, let's start to break these down. Obviously, you've got a very large file or a very large product that you design and configure, and so that really starts to push the abilities of iLogic. I mentioned a while ago having to deploy something across the enterprise to external teams. Maybe you want it on the web or the mobile unit. You're trying to integrate. Reusing a lot of data over and over. And you have a lot of drawings to create. And the reason I spend some time on iLogic here, and I think it's important, is because everybody gets it if you've got Inventor. And so it's one of those things that's very quick and easy to pick up and start getting some small victories. But how much time do you spend in it? Where are you ultimately trying to go? And those are the things that you really need to be asking yourself early in the process, so you don't sink too much time and energy and investment in something that ultimately has a dead end. And that dead end can have some ramifications if you spend a lot of time and energy and you have the company moving in a direction and you don't know there's a cliff at the end of this or right around the corner. So .NET, very powerful. You can do a lot of things with C# and you know, basic programming. But it does fall short when it gets down to the complexities within a model and drawing outputs. Those are two things that you really start to struggle in a .NET application. Give you an example here, and not to mention the maintenance of .NET versus ETO. Two very similar models, but you obviously see that the base is different and then the connection point in the middle is different. This is the amount of code it takes to impart that logic and the options to control those inputs to have those two outputs happen. The same amount of code it takes to do that with .NET can scale up 4 to 10 times the amount of code you have to write. And so you start looking at the back end of maintaining a project like that, and you start to look at very heavy costs just in time. That doesn't also account for the ease of deployment. We'll talk a little bit more about that. You know, when you're doing .NET can be effective more with configure to order, where everything's already mapped out, designed out, all the options are have their release drawing sets, but that's not so good when you have an engineered to order solution. The UI flexibility, .NET does not have some of the capabilities there to interface and integrate with the user and give you that in a web enabled platform. As I mentioned earlier, it also doesn't allow you to integrate down to the 3D design tool that you would use as easily. The ETO language inherently knows how to relate to 3D modelers unlike anything else out there, and that's what allows it to be able to do so much and so little of the amount of code, as you saw in the example earlier. And here's the big thing, the thing that happens on the fly, which is how do you get a very quick change deployed to everybody who's got the tool. .NET, you've got to recompile, you've got to redeploy, and then whenever they're not deploying it or downloading the latest, you demand that they do, and then they still don't, and so you have to force. And so those are just some of the challenges of having any kind of release product out there. Is everybody on the same version? Well, that's one of the nice things with ETO, is if everyone's using a call statement on the web platform, all you have to do is update the very central platform, and the very next call statement that uses that code is going to reflect those changes. And so updating something can be very quick and rapid. So what are the common hurdles? Why change? Your lights are on, the doors are open. You know, when you start looking at the solutions, they are solving big problems, but they also can cost quite a bit, and so that can be kind of a resistance to change sometimes, is because things are working. But this also goes back to the challenge. If you're not changing, if you're not looking at these tools to gain the efficiency and the operational impact that they can have, know that your competitors are, so you can't be stagnant. If you're not growing, if you're not changing, then you're falling behind. We have an internal programmer. This is a common challenge that we face, because it is hard sometimes to empower someone with the sophistication of a solution like ETO when that's the right fit for where the company's going, when they have a smart programmer that can whip things out. It's very easy for people to fall into the pattern of, well, he can do this, let's start doing it. And so you start kicking some things out, you get a lot of wins, you get a lot of quick victories, and it looks like the solution has got a lot of legs, and the president gets excited, the sales manager gets excited, and then they start listing, well, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. You start investing a lot of time, energy, and development. You even add more programmers. What you don't know is where are the hurdles and where are the shortfalls. And so these are some of the things that the ETO solutions don't have, is those roadblocks at the end that .NET can have, or C#. So we would encourage you to take that smart and sharp programmer, put the right tool in their hands. And if iLogic is the right tool, or Configurator 360, based on where you're trying to go today, then that's the tool you want to have. But if you're trying to get to a very sophisticated solution in the end, know where you're going is really the key. Configurators, I have seen this as a challenge in terms of perception. Don't get hung up on an ERP system that says that it can do ETO. I have seen a few that have the ability to configure, and it's really more configuring BOM data and accessing drawing files associated with those configurations. And in some cases, depending on the complexity of the product, that can actually work and be a good solution. But it's not the right fit for most. So again, it's that conversational value of where you're trying to go. so that you know where do you spend your time and energy. A ERP does not do engineered to order, and they shouldn't even make that claim, though I see it happening more and more. I recently saw one that actually made a legitimate attempt at it. The problem is you've got an ERP company that's also trying to be good at CAD data, and it just doesn't fit. They don't understand the complexities, and so again, you have customers find themselves in landlocked situations where they've invested time, energy, and resources, and they didn't know that there's a waterfall right around the bend. And now you've got management frustrated and upset, and maybe even balking at investing any more in the solution. So just be aware that ERPs are not good at configuration and engineered to order, though they may purport to be so. We do run into this. Have you worked with our ERP system? Well, from a development standpoint, we really don't care what kind of ERP system that you've got in place. If we're trying to integrate, the way we typically layer a solution is that is just at one layer of the product, and so it's looking to push and pull data from resources and destinations, and those are all controlled by the logic and requirements of the ERP system, and we just work by those guidelines. It doesn't bother us if you change ERP systems. We simply unhook and replug in, and we reformat the format of that data, but it doesn't change the operational solution at the user interface level. It's just the way we're pushing and pulling the metadata buried within it. So, and to that point, you know, have you worked with ours? So again, we're really kind of an ERP agnostic approach. It really doesn't matter, and so it's not a problem simply because we haven't worked with yours yet. The last thing is our product is complex, meaning you, the customer, view your product as extremely complex, and ours is always custom. And sometimes it's a challenge or a hurdle for us to help you understand that technology can solve your problem, even though it might be difficult to understand how or where that could really fit because you view your product as very different. It is true, some of you make snowflakes every time. It's completely different. You've got an orange today, you've got a banana tree the next, and there's just no associative connection in the design process. But what we can help you do is, in those situations, how do you integrate the data on the backside? Maybe we can't help you with a designer or a configurator or something that's engineering something on the fly because it's too different, but we can help you possibly on the back end integrating and pulling that data out to get it into those downstream processes. So again, why would you look at automation today? Well, it's a good question. We'll kind of revisit here, but it's, you know, you're really trying to grow through efficiency. You hear the word continuous process improvement, and some of you may have companies big enough that you've actually got someone with that title or that role, and so this is an area where we really can help you. The technology can help you in design, in engineering, and outputs. You're trying to get market share. You're trying to win in the battlefield and allow your sales team to compete. And that's where we can really help, whether it's getting data in your customers' hands faster, reducing the lead time because you're pulling the minutia out of engineering and letting them focus where they really need to focus instead of the simple stuff, but helping you operationalize certain steps so that you can do what you do really well. The other thing, as we talked earlier, is making sure you're protecting your intellectual property, and that those rules and the logic and everything you bring into a solution so it doesn't leave at 5 o'clock. And the last thing, as we said, if your market is moving and you're in one of those markets that's already got activity going, you don't want to be the person on the back end trying to catch up. Sometimes we have Customers use code words. We have, secret project names. The point is, when they make some of these changes competitively, they're doing it to get a knockout punch on the competition. You don't want to be on the receiving end of that or be so far behind that catching up could be the death knell to your existence. So just know, if your product fits within any of these categories of being able to be rules-based, being able to be streamlined, then someone in your industry is looking at it. So be aware of it, be thinking, and be planning. The last thing that I want to finish here and draw attention to, D3 does a lot of solutions. We do a lot of things in this area, but probably the biggest hurdle overall is finding a client that is so far down any one path that it's too painful to back up and take a left or a right turn. And also, that happens oftentimes is when engineering gets a hold of these tools and they can start to make progress, but they're not involving the other parts of the company like sales and IT and these other cross-functional people within your company that could tap into this kind of solution. You just start down the road because you can, and you don't know the impact of what it could have if you'd have made a left or a right turn early on to be able to operationalize this across your company. So again, invite D3 to the table at least to talk early in the process. We can at least give you a roadmap and an idea of what you should be looking at, you should be thinking about, and what you should be trying to avoid. And that, at the end of the day, is where we really hope to be able to bring value. And the real reason to have the session today is so that you can take a moment, pull your head up out of the rut, take a look to the left and the right, and say, where should I be going? And D3 can help you make that call. Thank you again for today, and I hope it was worth your time, and I'll turn this back over to the coordinator.